Necessarily, in such a view, the word consciousness changes its meaning. Now he has made a note below in the page. The curious speculation is now current that life entered Earth not from another world but from another planet. To the thinker, that would explain nothing. The essential question is how life comes into matter. Comes to matter at all, and not how it enters into the matter of a particular planet. So he's just clarifying some things. So necessarily, in such a view, the word consciousness changes its meaning. It is no longer synonymous with mentality but indicates a self-aware force of existence, of which mentality is a middle term. Below mentality, it sinks into vital and material movements which are for us subconscient. Above, it rises into the supramental, which is for us the superconscient. But in all, it is one and the same thing, organizing itself differently. This is once more the Indian conception of Chit, which as energy creates the worlds. Essentially, we arrive at the unity which materialistic science perceives from the other end when it asserts that mind cannot be another force than matter, but must be merely development and outcome of material energy. Indian thought at its deepest affirms, on the other hand, that mind and matter are rather different grades of the same energy, different organizations of one conscious force of existence. This was pretty interesting and pretty easy to understand. Let's read this again because it was very important as well. Essentially, we arrive at that unity which materialistic sciences perceives from the other end when it asserts that mind cannot be another force than matter. Science is saying mind and matter are the same force, but must be merely development and outcome of material energy. Indian thought at its deepest affirms, on the other hand, that mind and matter are rather different grades of the same energy, different organizations of one conscious force of existence. But what right have we to assume consciousness as the just description of this force? For consciousness implies some kind of intelligence, purposefulness, self-knowledge, even though they may not take the forms habitual to our mentality. Even from this point of view, everything supports rather than contradicts the idea of a universal conscious force. We see, for instance, in the animal, operations of a perfect purposefulness and an exact, indeed a scientifically minute knowledge which are quite beyond the capacities of the animal mentality, and which man himself can only acquire by long culture and education, and even then uses with a much less sure rapidity. We are entitled to see in this general fact the proof of a conscious force at work in the animal and the insect, which is more intelligent, more purposeful, more aware of its intention, its ends, its means, its conditions than the highest mentality yet manifested in any individual form on earth. And in the operations of inanimate nature, we find the same pervading characteristic of a supreme hidden intelligence, quote unquote, hidden in the modes of its own workings, which he quoted in the beginning of the chapter from Upanishad. The only argument against a conscious and intelligent source for this purposeful work, this work of intelligence, of selection, adaptation and seeking, is that large element in nature's operations to which we give the name of waste. But obviously this is an objection based on the limitations of our human intellect, which seeks to impose its own particular rationality, good enough for limited human ends, on the general operations of the world force. We see only part of nature's purpose, and all that does not subserve that part we call waste. Yet even our own human action is full of an apparent waste, so appearing from the individual point of view, which yet we may be sure subserves well enough the large and universal purpose of things. That part of her intention which we can detect, nature gets done surely enough in spite of, perhaps really by virtue of her apparent waste. We may well trust to her in the rest, which we do not yet detect. For the rest, it is impossible to ignore the drive of set purpose, the guidance of apparent blind tendency, the sure eventual or immediate coming to the target sought, which characterize the operations of world force in the animal, in the plant, in inanimate things. So long as matter was alpha and omega to the scientific mind, the reluctance to admit intelligence as the mother of intelligence was an honest scruple. But now it is no more than an outworn paradox to affirm the emergence of human consciousness, intelligence and mastery out of an unintelligent, blindly driving unconsciousness in which no form or substance of them previously existed. Man's consciousness can be nothing else than a form of nature's consciousness. It is there in other involved forms below mind. It emerges in mind. It is there in other involved forms It is there in other involved forms below mind. It emerges in mind. It shall ascend into yet superior forms beyond mind. Okay? It is there in other involved forms of mind, forms below mind. It emerges in mind, and it shall ascend into yet superior forms beyond mind. For the force that builds the world is a conscious force. The existence which manifests itself in them is conscious being. The existence which manifests itself in them is conscious being, and a perfect emergence of its potentialities in form is the sole object which we can rationally conceive for its manifestation of this world of forms.